What's up, folks? I'm your host Konrad. Well, tonight it's on my Sketchy Goodness with none other than the amazing Keith Grachow. Keith, how you doing today, bud?
Good man. How are you doing?
I am doing good. Today is a good day because I'm willing it to be so, even though maybe it's not the best day. Yeah. How are you?
That was good. I'm just plumbing along with a project I'm working on, and I had some really great teaching yesterday, so that was
Ooh,
pretty invigorating. And yeah, so it's been a good couple of days for sure in regards to productivity.
that's awesome. Actually, you know what? Then here's my first question for you.
Okay.
Often we hear about people who go take a class or a master class or see a lecture or watch a TED talk, and they themselves say, "I feel really inspired. I'm invigorated," and it sets them off for either a just short period of time, or at least maybe it instills something in them for a lifetime or whatever. Um, and they go off and they make some changes and they do whatever it is. Um, you've mentioned you've done some teaching, and that was sort of invigorating. From the end of like the teacher, um, what invigorates? What does that feel like? How does that happen? Because that feels like a perspective we don't hear a lot.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, just FYI, I'm also taking a class with Dave Ross as well. I don't know if I've mentioned that. He's got his the drawing from imagination class or dynamic figure drawing class. I can't remember the title of it. Uh, so I'm in doing that as well as teaching, and so it's kind of like I'm using some of the ideas I'm learning from Dave and putting it into some of the what I'm teaching. Um, it's really for me. Uh, I'm learning a lot because I have to figure out how do I parse what I know kind of almost instinctually at this point.
Yeah.
How do I parse it down in a way where somebody who has really very basic or just they're a little further down in their journey, but these are skills that they haven't really developed yet. So
Mm-hmm.
I have to figure out like how do I do that for somebody that's not advanced, and it's good. It's a really good way for the person to to learn, to kind of like um, take take a moment to slow down a little bit and make sure
Mm.
you're still using some of that process that you were taught at one point, right?
Ah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I find that between trying to figure it out and then once I'm like, I got it, I think this is going to really work. And then having it work, having the students receptive to it and go, this is really cool. This is fun. I never thought I can do this, and then seeing what they're doing and going, wow, that's they're getting it. Like they're
Mm.
picking it up. They're taking those pieces of information that I've again, none of this is like original stuff in the sense
Yeah.
of what I'm teaching, other than it's my spin on it, right? So, when I say I'm taking stuff from Dave, it's more inspiration, really. It's more like just some of the little things, the way he phrases, like thinking about like the order in which you draw things and things
Yeah.
like that.
Okay.
And so I'm like, well, that's a really great thing for me personally to use, and then it's something I can pass on to other people, right? And then like things that I've learned in various different places in life, and as
Mm-hmm.
well as trial and error, right? Doing it
Yeah.
myself over and over again, drawing over and over, and you know, failing constantly, and going, well, that doesn't really work. And so it's all that kind of stuff that you parse down, and then the art of it or the skill of it is how do you communicate that to somebody in a way that they get, right? Because
Okay,
not
yeah.
everybody, you may have the knowledge, the experience, but not everybody has the ability to take that and transfer it to people so they understand it, right? And
Yeah.
that's for me, that's the part that I'm still, learning and trying to make sure that, while I think they're getting it, am I explaining it to them in a way that it's gonna stick with them, and
Hmm.
that they're gonna be able to take it and continue on with it once they're done with my classes, right? So
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that I'm still trying to figure out, making sure that I'm not going too quickly, that what I'm explaining they're getting, and so yeah, it's that's where I'm learning a lot from it, as well as just really making sure that it's like kind of like stopping and smelling the roses. You're like being able to just like go, what, this is great. This what's in front of me is just beautiful, and I smell, you know, uh, nature around me, and I'm listening. You're more present in the moment, I think, when you have to like figure out how you actually do something versus you're just kind of going.
Do it.
I don't know about autopilot, but you're using another skill set to skip a bunch of steps to just go to do what you normally do.
Hmm.
So yeah, for that reason, it's been great. Just because yeah, then it reminds me, okay, I really need to slow down.
Oh yeah.
So
Well, it's interesting too because for me, I've had various jobs in my life, for instance, where I've typically, for some reason, I whenever I take up a job, I'm there for like 3 to 4 years, and then something happens, a life event, maybe I move somewhere, whatever, right? And I kind of shift, so I get quite good at what I'm doing, and then it's like, all right, let's go get a new job. Um, but obviously, you try and stay in something similar. And I always find it interesting when I've had people realize how long I've done a particular job, and they go, "Oh, you're like really good at this," and I'm like, "Yeah, I just done it a long time." And they're afraid. Like I've had managers be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but we have to do like a basic review," and I'm like, "That's good. Like review the basics, because at no point are the basics not a good thing to know and make sure you know." So
yeah,
you know, I find people that have been at it for a long time um, sometimes can be aversive to the idea of like, oh, I don't have to review the basics. I've been doing this for 30 years, and it's like, well, does it hurt? Like, you know, um, yeah, it's always interesting to me, and good to take that time to do it. Now you mentioned something that as actually my brain in my own creative ends, my writing has got me sort of thinking is autopilot. So for me, when I'm writing, because I have lived on this earth long enough, I speak, I have speech patterns, I have statements that I like to throw out there. Anyone who's watched this show or perhaps any of my interviews I've done on Wednesday Night Reviews will know that I love the word interesting. I never say it in any means of being condescending or trying to poke fun at. I genuinely find stuff interesting. I just like the word. Um,
mm,
and what I find is when I'm writing, um, if I'm not very actively thinking about a scene, and this happened to me last night where I was like, okay, cool, like I've hit the end of the first scene, and now I need my characters to get themselves to where I want the second scene to start because I know what I want to have happen, but I got to get them there. I'll be like, okay, why? And I have to actively think, okay, why do they need to go over there? Cool, cool. I can come up with a reason that makes sense, and or I can just use the event to draw them in. Love it. And I'm like, okay, cool. So like they got on horses and they started going down the street. And I find myself diving very quickly into like I don't have to think about it. I can just hammer out sentences that are totally clear, they make sense, they fit contextually, but it's like who cares, right? Like why is this sentence here? Does it need to be here? If I just stopped one scene and started another scene and said the next day blah blah blah, have would that be any worse? And the reason I'm saying all this, Keith, is I'm wondering. I noticed in my writing I had autopilot phrases or ways of writing to just get words on the page. I'm wondering if there is times when you have autopilot drawing where you're not, and not because you're so skilled at what you do and you just kind of know, okay, cool, I'm drawing. Say you draw a big battlefield, so you're just hammering out all these people and they've got armor on and they're doing this and you're just sort of monotonously drawing this huge battle because you don't have to think about it. But like, I'm wondering if you ever have times where you actually stop thinking and your brain just starts sort of filling in, and then you have to stop back and go, wait a minute, consciously that doesn't make sense. And if you were to have been more maybe mentally aware of what you were doing, you wouldn't have drawn that way. Does that make sense? Appreciate that was a lot of words.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. Before we do that, I guess I should ask, for the drawing or doodle tonight, do you want me to continue the cowboy? I can ink the cowboy.
That'd be great if you're up for that. Let's do the cowboy.
Sure, as well. Since you mentioned horses and
for those tuning in with us, whether you're live or watching sometime in the future on YouTube, one, thank you. But also, our first episode of the year, we were, so to speak, getting back up on the horse. I cracked the joke. My parents and my family and friends around quite enjoyed it, and they were like, "Oh, we should dress Connor up as a cowboy." And so I was like, "Hey, Keith, can you draw a cowboy?" And he kindly obliged. So here's our cowboy. But yeah, like with this drawing, for instance, Keith, I appreciate, like, I can kind of, you're quite talented at what you do. Obviously, you can multitask quite well. Do you find there are times, like, if you're, say, drawing the form of the horse here, where because maybe you're paying more attention to the words I'm saying and wanting to converse, you can kind of artistically autopilot, but then notice, hey, that's not actually what I need to do?
So I think what happens, we've talked about this a bit, where there's certain things I wouldn't be able to do during our podcast. Yeah. Right. I need my full focus to figure something out. And so that's often, like, for me at least, that's the early stages of figuring out what the composition is going to be, and then also in the pencil stages where I'm very, doing very rough general shapes. If you were watching last time, I was doing that, right? Yeah. Because you kind of gave me something very specific as a challenge, and because I've kind of drawn it before, I was able to use, like, I guess my library to recall it pretty easily. And as I had said as well, I did need a bit of, once I got to a certain stage where I was like, okay, I'm pretty certain I've gotten this right, but I just want to verify it. I did go to reference. So different stages will require different kinds of focus. But also there are, when it comes to, like, autopilot, I don't know if it's exactly autopilot as much as it's being able to split your attention very quickly from one thing to the other, almost like a microsecond, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So in the case of what we're doing here, I think that I can, like, it's almost, I don't even know if I can detect it, but there's probably some part of me that's going, okay, I know what this is in front of me. I'm drawing a leg. I know to draw this lightly, and then I'll add a little bit more line depth as I go. And I can also have a conversation with you, but I'm probably on a very micro, very quick jumping back and forth, right? Mm-hmm. So, but there is also, and this is stuff I'm not sure I can understand completely, so I don't know if I'm getting it right. But there is something to the idea of being in, like, a Zen state where time changes while you're working, while you're drawing or creating, where you don't realize that 30 minutes have gone by like this. Where, and so sometimes when I'm drawing and I'm in a zone, Zen state, I will be able to just know what things look like without reference. I may even be able to, there's oftentimes where I don't need to even really pencil it. I can just like ink it straight. Right. And I know there's artists that have that ability. Um, it, I guess really what it is more or less, I can project the image onto the page very clearly.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing it very clearly where it's supposed to be on this white or, relatively blank page.
Yeah.
And so, that does happen. And, you try to get there. It's not something you could always command, but as my students ask me, how do you get there? How do you get to that where you can see things? And I say, well, oftentimes it's doodling or, just getting warmed up for the day, and then you'll be able to get to that place much easier, where you're and I don't know, like I keep on coming back to the word autopilot. To me, that connotates like you're not thinking about anything. You're just kind of it's like your body's just like doing it, and you're not. It's not like I've even been listening to people talk about like yoga, and where they say, oh, it's impossible for you to like blank your mind. You can like get your mind so that you're thinking about things that are very comforting to you. So you're not. It's not like you
Hmm.
blank your mind. There's always something going on in there. It's just that I have the ability to do multiple things at the same time. It's not even at the same time. I'm just doing like microsecond back and forth, back and
Yeah.
forth, really, really quickly, right? So every word I'm getting in the weeds here, but every word I'm speaking to you, probably in between that word, I'm able to like draw something, right? Draw a little
Yeah.
thing.
Exactly.
So it's, but it is an interesting conversation. I am curious to know how other artists or creatives get to that place, and what they can achieve if they are in that state where
Hmm.
uh, things just kind of start, the focus is just so pristine that they can really achieve some beautiful things, and they may not even, if they think about it, they don't even know how they got there, right? Because you're so
Yeah.
focused on what it is that you're doing. So it's an interesting phenomenon for sure. And I'm not sure if I'm explaining it super clearly, but it is an interesting kind of idea
Yeah. I mean,
we go through.
yeah. It definitely sounds a lot like, or at least similar to, sort of Carl Jung's theory of like flow state, um,
Hmm.
where you're just sort of super focused on a task, but not like you hit a point where you're not perhaps actively thinking about it, but you're in it, and so you're kind of optimized, if you will. I'm doing a horrible job of explaining this, but I don't want to also Google and just read like a Wikipedia paragraph about it. But if you're out there, Google Jungian Carl Jung Jung flow state. Um, it's really interesting, and it's a lot of it sounds a lot like what sort of Keith you're talking about, when it comes to being able to just kind of be in autopilot. Um, but like I've had moments like that when I'm writing, and what I find for me is, and this sort of gets back to the question I asked. Sometimes I have to very actively think about what I'm writing. Right, I have to stop and ask myself, why are these characters here? Where are they going? What are they doing? And I have to think, right? And sometimes that's coming up with plot or a scene or whatever. But other times, and I can't explain why it happens, but my brain's, I'll hit a scene and I'll go, okay, cool. Roughly, I want the scene to go like this, and I just sort of start writing, and then it feels like, um, maybe it feels like I'm watching TV is the best way to describe it, and I'm just transcribing what I'm watching, but I
Hmm.
don't have to think about it. I just kind of, the two knights took up arms, and the dragon slithered out from the shadows, and it just keeps moving, and I don't have to be like, okay, what happened next, Conrad? Think about it. It's just,
Hmm.
blah, here's all these things that happened, this stream event, and then all of a sudden, like, I'll stop because I'll hit a moment where I have to go, think, Conrad, what are they doing now? Why are they doing it? And I'll look up and go, what's my word count at? And I've added like 1,200 words, and I'm like, what happened there? Because sometimes I can struggle to write 500, and then other times it's like, boom, here's 2,000, here's 1,200. It's like, you know, um, but that's that. I feel like it's sort of similar. Where, like, I don't have to think about it; it just autopilots. That's the way you said it. I clicked for me. Um, yeah.
Do you think that you've been thinking about the story pre-writing? Like you've been actually thinking about it enough that you're just now getting the information that that's been percolating into your head. It's kind of triggering, some of these things that you've been thinking about, and you're like, oh, this is where I'm going to put this, or you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
may not
yeah.
even, let's say it could have been a fleeting thought you had while you're in the shower, forgot about it, but then when you're writing stuff
Click.
down, all of a sudden that thought is triggered. Or it could be you've seen something similar or read something similar, and you're like, this could apply here. This plot
Hmm.
point. It's not the same thing, but you're using it in a way that um, is similar to it. So you can actually it's like a reference that you're using.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely feel like there are like 100%. There's times where I've sat down and thought about, a story element or an event or whatever that's going to work for my what I'm writing, but not like written it down, not sat down, taken out my phone and just started doing that. Um, and yeah, there's definitely been times where there's like little moments or something that I actively can remember my brain being like, "That's a cool idea." Um, but then, yeah, when I go to write it, it just comes out. But normally, I can. This is gonna sound so weird, and anyone who's not done something creative, which I don't think there's anyone who's not done something creative, but maybe someone can't relate, will think I sound crazy. Um, but I can spot when that happens, and then sometimes it just comes out. It's weird. Um, but yes, I love when if I'm throughout my day thinking about, oh, what do I want them to do, and what's going to be the next thing, and I finally get to sit down and get in front of my keyboard here and hammer it out, and it just goes. I think that's so cool.
Hmm.
Do you find when it comes to illustration, um, that happens for you? Like you maybe you're sitting there thinking, you're eating an apple or walking down the street or whatever, and your brain's like, I wonder how I could draw that, and you sort of start puzzling through it, and then all of a sudden you sit down and you're just like, oh, this is just, yeah, this works, this is easy, and you hammer through.
Yeah, and I mean both that and when I'm writing, right? That um, like sometimes I'll have that's kind of I think where a lot of, for me at least, a lot of fun comes from in creating is something that isn't existing yet, and you're trying to problem solve like how to make it exist, and then so you're thinking about it and you're going, what would it look like if I did this, or what happens next in this story or to this
Hmm.
character, right? Um, I find with writing, I find that when I'm thinking about the story, a lot of that never comes into play in the actual narrative, the prose,
Okay.
because it's exposition or backstory. It's just trying to figure out the character and figuring out their setting and what how they live in that place. But you may not, it may not be pertinent to the story in any way.
Yeah, but
Um,
it puzzles in why they are the way they are. Yeah, I hear you.
yeah,
Okay.
and then I kind of do that too when I'm like world building characters and stuff. I'll draw sometimes. As I've gotten more in, well, if I'm being hired for something, I don't do that because I don't have the time
Oh,
to
fair.
like, like if I'm working on something for somebody and there's a timeline and all that stuff, and you're getting paid a certain amount, I will world build and character build, but a lot of it I use. Right, I'm the mindset of like everything I'm creating, I'm going to use this. I'm looking at the script. I'm going, okay, here's some poses I need to figure out for this character. So what does that look like? And
Mhm.
I'll use that later down the line. Whether I actually grab the actual drawings from my sketchbook or whatever, my digital sketchbook, or whether I use just like the reference for it. It's not wasted. Whereas if it's something that's more for me or just something that like I'm working with somebody else, it's our equal thing, and we're trying to, we're playing. There's no timeline or anything. Then that's where I might create things that I may not ever use. Although,
Okay.
yeah, although I mean, or I may not use right away. Maybe it's something that will be used like down the line in another
I
issue or
feel like
something.
that's more accurate.
Yeah.
Also, quick note, wonderful Mr. Paul Kemp.
Hey,
Good
Paul.
evening, gentlemen. The illustration is great already. It's always amazing to have Sketchy Goodness on when I get home. Paul, thank you so much for tuning in, and glad we could help.
Yeah. So for people that are watching this, Paul's really great. Um, he's always very supportive of artists and creators, and we've been. I haven't gotten to the latest commission, but we essentially every time I see him, he commissions me for something new on a comic book sketch cover, and so we have like a whole series
Amazing.
going of characters. So yeah, the next time I have a show, I'll probably start working on some of that stuff again.
Paul. Um, I was sort of curious, and totally unrelated to what we've been talking about. Um, the I enjoy books. Obviously, I like comic books. As of late, I've been reading like prose books. Not, I don't know how to the word to use, but like word books, if you will.
Yeah,
Um,
pros.
Prose, yeah. Mostly fiction because that's my deal. And I at the same time I love myself a good audiobook. I
Mm-hmm.
actually just finished the first book by so I gotta shout this out because it was wonderful and lovely. Called Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I finished the first book in I believe it's a trilogy. I could be wrong,
Mm.
but I believe that ended on an absolute like it felt like a mid paragraph, but then it was like it went silent for just a beat, and then it was like this production is brought to you by Audible, and I was just like um, and so the conversation has come up as it often does is about whether or not audiobooks are reading, um, and for me personally, I find them to be two very different things. For anyone who is maybe hard of sight or something like that, absolutely audiobook it up. Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I find for me when I'm reading a physical book and I have to take the active time to read, I find information gets encoded differently in my head. Whereas if I'm listening to it and it's more of a drama, um, I can be more passive about it. Obviously, 'cause you're just listening. But like I don't have to stop what I'm doing and like sit and just listen. Though that is a lovely thing to do sometimes. Like I was at work today, I was listening to I think it's called The Emperor's Blade. Um, but because they're functionally different when it comes to how you take in the information, how it encodes. Um, for me, they're very different things. And I
Mm-hmm.
was wondering like what your sort of thoughts are on I guess that question directly, but also like the different ways in which we take in media, especially relative to, say, comic books.
So yeah, I mean, this kind of this it could be even uh, we can even bring in like a bit of a wider topic on social media and how information and the way that we interact with people has changed because of it, right? But let's we'll narrow it down to what you're talking about because I think that would just be a really long conversation. Um, so
Fair.
for me, I like something tactile. I like the feel of it in my hand, and I feel that, and that's comics as well as books. Um, and to me, at least, because I am not sight challenged, though I have a hard time reading uh, close up. I have to like push the book back a bit now, but that's just getting older. Um, but I find for me, there's something like there's an achievement of like having a certain amount of pages to read in a night and getting that done. And I think that there's a skill in regards to reading uh, something at least on paper and paying attention to what you're reading. I
Hmm.
don't read. I mean, I'm sure it's similar digitally, but yeah, I mean, I read, like online all the time,
Oh yeah.
and it just doesn't feel the same per se. But I'm sure it's a
Yeah.
similar kind of skill where you're focused and taking in what you're reading. So I guess for me, it's more preference. I don't know if there's an actual skill difference in regards to reading something that's on paper versus something digitally.
Hmm.
Um, Now, when it comes to audio, for sure, that's a different skill set. Um,
Yeah.
right? You're listening now, and so you don't have the words in front of you. You're imagining it. You can close your eyes, and um, I see it as a valid way of you know getting stories. That's all it
Oh
is.
hell
Just is
yeah.
just uh, getting like my father-in-law. He's legally blind and hasn't read anything in years because of it. He hasn't read like prose or anything, and now he's got like a machine that kind of he can just load in all these different stories and stuff. So it's kind of opened up a whole world for him.
Oh cool.
And I mean, obviously there's Audible and stuff like that, but this is like for
Well, yeah, that too. Yeah.
blind for blind people. But um, there's probably things that certain kinds of skills that you get from it, and then there's other skills you get from listening. If you're,
Hmm.
I do find that like when it comes to taking in um, TV and movies, my like bandwidth is shortened. Like
Yes.
I used to be able to watch something, from beginning to end without really needing to have a break. And now I find that I like if it's not like really really grabbing me, I go to my phone and start like
Yeah.
looking at stuff on the phone. So that has changed for sure. That's kind of like why I still like to read traditional, just because it's I there's a comfort, there's a ritual to it,
Yeah.
um,
Oh.
and so but that's my preference, and everybody I guess ultimately there's a benefit to reading, and if you're doing it however you get it, that's what's important, and there's a benefit to reading something of quality, right?
Mm.
So something that's well written, that has words that you don't understand, or concepts that are a little bit more challenging for you
Yes.
to grasp, because that's you need to constantly challenge your brain, and if you're not doing that, then you're missing out on potentially uh, growing, right, as a human being. So
Oh hell
I
yeah.
do advocate for that kind of thing, right?
Oh, definitely. Like it's so cool to hear about your in-laws with through technology being able to enjoy books. That sounds wonderful, and
Yes.
fascinating. Um, I find for me personally, like where this sort of question comes from, and why I noticed it to even begin with in myself was um, when I am reading prose, because you see the printed name. For some reason, I can get character names near instantly, and I'm really good at it, like most people, I imagine. But if I'm doing an audiobook, um, I couldn't tell you a character's name, but I know everything that happened to them. I know what they look like, well, as long as I was giving a description. Um,
Hmm.
and like really good at it. It's just it's a weird thing where I'm like, that's a odd lapse in information to have, given I might have taken up to 12 hours to listen to an audiobook. Um, it's interesting. And actually, Leo dropped a comment on it. Audiobooks are read by an actor, usually, fair, and it's their interpretation of the written word. You may have a different interpretation in your head.
That's true.
Absolutely.
I'm assuming
Um,
that's my dad.
yes, absolutely. And no, that is
I
a 100% true. Um, I forget where. I believe it's Lord of the Rings. Um, I think it was something. What happened with that? Because they had the original animated film from the
the Ralph
70s.
Bakshi.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, the Ralph
Um,
Bakshi one. Yeah.
yeah, where Aragorn is represented by someone, or drawn to, by someone who is fairly dark skinned, black hair, and then, and obviously in the new films, the cast Viggo Mortensen. And if I'm not mistaken, in the Lord of the Rings film or books, he's not actually described. Um,
Mm.
Tolkien did an interesting thing, and I love it, where he didn't really describe what certain characters looked like, um, other than like, oh, they had a sword, they had a cloak, they were, and it was like key information. But beyond that, it was like, yeah, you do what you want to do with this character. Fill in the blank,
Hmm.
people. I find that fascinating. So yeah, like absolutely, when it comes to interpretation, massive. Speaking of which, interpretation, Keith. When it comes to the cowboy you're drawing,
Yeah.
is this, yeah, like how did you come up with this specific pose? Why or how? Why does he look the way he does? What's he wearing? Like all that stuff. How'd you come up with it?
Uh, well, I'm sure I've seen characters that look like this. I've drawn this type of pose before when I'm trying to think. Well, I have done in the past. I've done some Western type stuff. So, um, just whether it's been for like myself or a story I was working on. So, I think that you have to learn how to draw some of these things, right? Um, and then I don't know, like the some of the little details. I'm sure I'm getting incorrect, so I'm just kind of figuring it out. It's just not meant to be anything other than for fun, right? So
Oh
i'm
yeah.
just I'm just trying to do it the way I think it should be, but I'm sure it's not technically correct in regards to like the way the harness and all that stuff is on them. But when you are drawing and you get to, when you're trying to learn how to draw, you have to learn how to break things down in a way that is manageable so that you can keep on doing it over and over again, right? So,
Yeah.
like I just broke it down into shapes. If you watch the last video, you'll see I just broken it down into shapes, and essentially I doodled it first very roughly, broken down into shapes, um, and then um, once I started to see the from the doodle, like kind of like what this was, I was using that as a reference to sharpen the doodle into something that was a little bit more of a thing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I started going into the shapes and putting in And then once I was happy with the composition of it, I started to think about what the character would be, and going into some of the little bit more detailed aspects of it. Right. I did use a reference, but not really. I'm not really using anything from the reference other than just making sure, like a couple little details, like where the harness is located exactly and stuff like that. But for the most part, this is from my own imagination. And it's just having drawn this so many times before, you're not seeing all the failures. You're just seeing all the,
Yeah.
like all the successes are right in front of you here, right? But there's been like many failures to get to for it to look like this without having to put a huge amount of effort on my part, right?
Oh, 100%. Like, how many thousands of times have you drawn a horse, drawn someone in just fabric clothing to make sure it looks right, that the fabric moves correctly, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I did want to touch on that. You sort of mentioned it a couple minutes ago there, but when it comes to, especially in comics, drawing, say, a character throughout a story, or even just a page, depending on the page, you might be drawing someone from a bunch of different angles, or slightly tweaked. But say if you're drawing a character that's turning around an object, all of a sudden you might be drawing them, from the back, from the front, uh, 1/4 side view, 3/4, and then the front. Um, Not short. I don't want to say shortcuts, but like, what do you think is the best way to practice that kind of breakdown, I guess, or not breakdown, but like the repetitiveness of it, to keep it, one, at least a little interesting for yourself,
Trying to keep it consistent
but
so that
be
it
able to
looks
do
like the
that.
character.
Yeah, yeah. What's the key that you found?
Well, that's why I'm taking Dave Ross's class, because he teaches the construction of a character from using your imagination. It's really just breaking it down into like a mannequin form, like
Okay.
boxes, and like the chest. I'll just draw it here. Like practicing drawing what a chest would generally look like, uh, and doing it in a way so that you can kind of see it in a 3D. So you're kind of looking through it as if it's like semi-transparent,
Oh, okay.
um, right? And then you start adding in, like, okay, now I'm going to add in the torso here, and that's like there's everybody kind of draws these shapes a little bit differently, but essentially, if you figure out what works for you, then you can just go, okay, well, I know how to draw it this way, right? What if I were to take that similar shape that I drew for the chest, but I'm now moving, when I'm kind of looking down on it, right? So
Oh,
now,
okay.
right, instead of looking at it kind of front on, now I'm kind of above it, right? And you have to understand perspective and things like that a little bit. So that the line where the chest is kind of moves down a little bit, and that um, the torso is now going to overlap,
Mm.
right? So this is just practice. This is just it's not like you're going to get this on your first try. You have to um, constantly work on it, so that you get it, so that it's correct, right? And that's how you would be consistent if this character, had this kind of shaped body, that you would just. It's why it's important to make sure you're putting in like the mannequin first before you go to details, right? You have to put in
Yeah.
the shapes, the form before you know. So you're making sure you're getting proportions right, and then everything kind of falls into place, right?
Right on. Yeah, because
So
I mean, once you've got the mannequin, so to speak, putting the clothes on the mannequin's not all that well. I can't say that, but
Well,
putting the clothes on the mannequin should be simpler.
yeah, well, those are. It's kind of like a puzzle. So if you think about a puzzle where you don't know what it is when you first start it, but you start finding like similar shapes, similar colors, putting them together. You have like a game plan for it, and then once you start to put stuff together, then you kind of know what should go next
Yeah.
and what you go off. You wouldn't have known that if you hadn't started to like organize it early on, right? You wouldn't have been able to figure that out, that where that piece goes, like first thing. You need reference or the clues from the other pieces. So that's kind of it's how when you're drawing, you have to start off with certain steps first, which inform you what the next step's going to be, and then what the step after that is, and then after that, and then after that, right? So when it comes to like knowing like how the clothing is, well, once you figure out what the form is underneath, you go, okay, I get that if this is going to be like a tight jacket or vest on them, then I know it's going to be form fitting. But then I have to know what the material is. What is the leather? Is it a leather or rawhide type material? So it's gonna look kind of like dried, cracked maybe. So you may see lots of little lines in it, right? Um, Whereas if it was like more of like a softer leather, it would be more like pillowy folds, right?
Yeah.
So those are all things that kind of tell you what it's going to be. Um, you just have to, but you may not know that until I wouldn't necessarily know that the guy who's wearing this vest now, that that's what he was going to wear when I first started drawing him, right? And then I'm not necessarily, is it rawhide? Is it like a cloth vest? If it's a cloth vest, if I'm imagining him wearing a cloth vest, I probably wouldn't put so many lines into maybe this is more like a leather or something, and there's like a seam on the side here. So you just, all of that stuff, one thing leads to another, leads to another. When you're a really well-developed artist, you can kind of you're not skipping steps as much as you're knowing what's supposed to happen next without having to put it down on paper. So, like for example, I don't necessarily always have to draw the mannequin, if like the character,
Right.
if I just um, do a quick gesture or like a stick figure, let's say, and then I'm like, okay, I imagine what the mannequin is pretty clearly here. I don't need to draw the mannequin. I'm just going to go right into like a finished piece. But
Mhm.
that's something that you have to be pretty confident that you're getting it correct, and you may, that confidence may end up biting you in the butt, because you may find that you after you've drawn it, you go, ooh, well, that's actually not right, and I just wasted all that time. So like if you're in a time crunch, you may have to. That may be what you need to do, because you need to get things done quickly, and you're confident enough that you're gonna get it, that you're not gonna worry about that kind of stuff. But I mean, um, it's just a bunch of steps that you need that lead from one to the other, that kind of tell you what it is as you're going.
Yeah. That's awesome. Kevin Manklo over on Instagram says, "Nice stallion."
Thanks, man.
Agreed.
Yeah, Kevin's always drawing. He's always doing some fun stuff on Instagram, and um, I always enjoy watching his videos.
Come to think of it, I don't think I've seen a day where he hasn't posted a story inking something.
Yeah.
Um, Talk about consistency, which is something we've sort of talked about a lot today. Um, Go, Kevin. Kevin says the horse looks good also.
Thanks, man. Wait, which
Nice.
shoe's the Stallion?
Yeah. Also, can you do me a favor, Keith? Can you zoom in on his face for a second?
Sure.
Love it.
So we're at 200% right now, just as an FYI. So this is you're seeing like the the lines are a little bit more uh, rasterized, right?
Mm,
Um, and really, we're not you wouldn't be seeing it if I unless I was doing this digitally. If this is printed, you wouldn't be getting that close. So it's not necessary. Like when you look at it from this distance, it kind of um, I'm the lines are very light at this point. If I work on this more, I'll darken some of the lines that are needed to be darkened. Because I'm working digitally, I can work a little different than like a regular inker that would be working traditionally, right? Where
yeah.
that first line, I mean, they build up too, but you don't necessarily want it to. I mean, I guess it's style. It's the way that you want to do it. But most mainstream comics, the lines are pretty solid and stuff. But I like the idea of it being kind of sketchy, even though it's my inks, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely find, at least of your stuff that I've seen that isn't colored, you do have that sort of sketchier, hand drawn look, which I think looks good. I like it.
Yeah.
Also, Kevin has come with a question, not an answer to ours, but a question. What resolution is your canvas for print normally?
300 DPI. So
So
yeah, go ahead.
I, I have a question on that. On a TikTok earlier today, by oh my god, I can't remember her name. She's been on my show. Her comic is named Rich. The first issue is out. Go get it. Um, she's out on the West Coast. Um, she also mentions that basically when she's going to get something printed to do it in 300 DPI.
Yeah,
Why? What it? I don't even know what that honestly is. What is it?
it's like dots per inch. Um,
Oh,
it's the amount of dots that the print like when you're printing that the amount of dots that will print in a line, right?
oh,
And so the idea being
huh.
this, and I'm not an expert, so I may be off about it, but from my understanding, when you work when you have a lower resolution uh, and you plan on printing, what the ink the printer does is, let's say, for example, it's a pretty detailed illustration in color that you're printing and you're doing it at a lower resolution, let's say at 150, because it's not putting in as many dots per line. It's really doing is it's kind of extrapolating what the dots it needs to fill in. So it may give it a little bit of a blurry. It may, instead of like, let's say there's like 300 um, uh, like dots that are very specific details that are going
Like
to
a
build up
pointillist painting or
to,
something.
yeah, build up to like what the thing is that you created. With if it's 150, it's got half that, which means it's not going to just not lay in ink. It's going to extrapolate what that dot would have been, and so it may be like the same color dot that it puts next to it, even though if there's a 300, it wouldn't be the same color, right? It would
Oh,
be
okay.
like a slightly different color. So that gradation is going to be banded, or it's going to be a little bit blurry, and
Hmm.
therefore the quality isn't going to look as good. So when you're printing, you want to have at least the standard is 300 is essentially, and of course that's going to be dependent on size of what you're printing at,
Yeah.
as well as um, like where it's going to be printed, right? So for like a comic book, 300 DPI is good. I've worked with printers that want 600, and I think it's overkill. I don't see the necessity for it. I'm not sure why they do it, because when it comes to the other part of this is that you're the larger the DPI, the more and the more megabytes or gigabytes
Oh,
your
okay.
file is going to be. And if you're working with a really big, let's say you have an illustration and it has like 30 layers on it in Photoshop, layers being right here. Well, each layer takes up a certain amount of space in your, makes up megabytes, right? Or gigabytes. It's taking a certain amount of space to make the file. So you just, when you're working with like a larger DPI, that means there's more detail it's putting in. Therefore, the file, the image is going to be much bigger, and therefore, when you're going to, let's say you get to a certain size, it may start slowing your processing down, right? Because your computer processor, especially with a program like Photoshop, takes quite a bit of processing to work. So the larger the file, it could, or you have to adapt your workflow. Because if I normally have like 20 or 30, not 20 or 30, probably about 10 or 15 files open, but they're all fairly small comparatively.
So all of a sudden you have this chunker.
Yeah, and I like having those files open because I'm constantly referring to them, going back to something and putting a detail in. So I'm using them while they're open. I'm actively using them, and I'd have to change my workflow if I can only have like one file open at a time. So anyway,
and
300.
300 because it's sort of the standardized. Plus, I imagine it works well for artists.
Yes.
I'm willing to bet too, when you have a, say, 600 DPI file, regarding like taking up processing power and the size of the file, as far as Photoshop is concerned, whether or not a particular pixel within that grid is black, red, white, yellow, green, blue, purple, whatever, it's still a pixel. So it's still chewing up data. So I imagine, if it's like 15 layers at that high density, it just becomes a huge chunking file even when it's empty. Wow.
Yeah. But I mean, there are, like, if you're a photographer, you may want to have a larger size, because color is also, depending on your kind of printer that you have, you get, you want to have as much color range as possible. And so when you have more dots to be able to put into your, on the line there, you have more possibility if you have a really vibrant photo, right? And that may be the same case with like something that you're illustrating. If there's some really super vibrant colors that require more of the ink to do that, you may need a larger file. I'm not, that part I'm not 100% sure about. It's actually something I'd be curious to know, if like you have like if you're using like a special ink, fluorescent color ink, if you need more dots to make it that much more vibrant looking, and therefore you would need to save it as 600 DPI because of that situation. I'm not sure about that, but that would be something I'd be curious to know if somebody knows the answer to that.
That is really interesting. Also, Kevin says, I remember back in the day chopping up my scanned comic pages, trying to fit them on 100 meg zip and jazz drives. Kids these days don't know the struggle. Love it.
Yeah, I remember those as well.
Oh yeah. That being said, Keith, we're down to a minute. It's already been an hour. We're officially at actually 8 p.m. because we started 30 seconds later, whatever. That is a very good looking cowboy. I'm loving I want to say, rather large squirrel in the corner. I could be wrong there.
It's a cactus.
I
haven't finished putting in the. It's like, I like to put in things that have character to them, so it kind of does look a little bit like it could be. But yeah, if I were to put more detail, you'd see that there's flowers blooming on it, and there's like little cactus spines, the little whatever you call them, protruding. So
never grab one. Never.
Sure, it could be a squirrel.
No, I like the cactus better. Thematically fits, and just never grab one. We have a couple of cacti around the house. One of which is, I think it's currently on our bathroom window ledge, and I may have one night accidentally knocked it with my elbow, and something dropped, and reflexively I grabbed at it. And I grabbed a cactus which had quills in it, and dear God,
Mm.
don't do that. But yes, Keith, again, we are at the end of our hour. Absolutely, once again, as always, thank you for hanging out with me for an hour, making my sketchy goodness good. Drawing a wicked cowboy, and yeah, I will see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2? Nah, collector problems, cliffhangers, mystery.